Okay. Hello and welcome, everybody. And thank you to everybody for joining us this evening. If I know you already, or don't know you already, happy to have you here. My name's Jonathan Cohn. I'm the policy director with Progressive Mass. As we think ahead to the coming months in Massachusetts, one thing that I know is on many people's minds is the long list of potential ballot questions this November. There are some that are good and there are some that are terrible. And among the list of terrible ballot questions are the tax cutting measures from the corporate lobby groups in the state. And delighted to have joining us this evening Harris Gruman from the SEIU State Council in Raise Up Massachusetts to dive into what are these corporate kind of lobby groups trying to do here in Massachusetts, what organizing has already been happening against them, and how can people here plug into that work right now and in the coming months. So the way this will work is I'll bring up Harris. Harris has some slides, and we'll go through presentation, walk everybody through this. If you have clarifying questions during the presentation, feel free to drop those in the chat, but we'll also have a formal Q&A session at the end. But then, without further ado, Harris, I'm going to add you onto Spotlight. Feel free to screen share as well, and take it away.
All right. Okay, that's great. Thanks everybody for being here. It's a very important issue we're dealing with here, and I hope I can help explain it. It's actually quite a complicated, epic struggle that we're in the middle of here. The tech billionaires are coming for fair share. Now, that's not the way we originally thought about all this, but we realize that this is what they're actually doing, and it's very important to understand that if we're going to defeat them in this campaign. But really, people should see it as a continuation of the fight for a fair and adequate tax system in Massachusetts. And it's a direct continuation or reaction to our victory in 2022 on the Fair Share Amendment, the millionaires tax. So last August, Massachusetts' own tech bros, we had Elon Musk and others up at the national level, but our own tech bros and billionaires launched a devastating pair of ballot questions. And one of them would cut $5.4 billion, 10% of the entire state budget every year by reducing the state income tax from 5% to 4%. And the second one would reform the state's 62F law, which is the revenue cap law that Governor Baker invoked a couple of years ago, that was passed in 1986 by a bunch of Grover Norquist types. And it's a thing basically to, strangle state funding for the services we need. And the cost of what they are going to do with it, they're basically weaponizing it so that it becomes something that really clamps down on the state's budget every year and eventually costs the state billions of dollars on top of the loss from the income tax. That's why Jonathan actually came up with this visual here. Due to recent budget cuts, the light at the end of the tunnel has been switched off, which I think is pretty accurate to what they're talking about doing. I mean, it's that devastating. Now, of course, they say these are tax cuts for working people. And they say, they have ads that say, working families, give yourself a tax cut. So the real question is, who does benefit from these tax cuts that they're proposing? And we looked at that, and it turns out if you're a low wage worker at the bottom of the income ladder, like the personal care attendants, the home care workers that I represent through SEIU, 55,000 personal care attendants, you would get back $44 a year on average. But if you're a one percenter, you make $1 million or more a year, you would get back $31,564 a year. That is a huge difference and clearly is a tax cut that mainly benefits the wealthy. The middle class would almost all get about $500 a year, which is a pretty small amount of money to get back on a 10% cut to the state budget, which means you could no longer rely on your public schools. You could no longer get subsidized childcare. The whole healthcare system would be in free fall. Roads would not be repaired. I mean, just a disaster. So these are not tax cuts for working families, even the way they're put on the ballot, even the way they claim they are. Uh, so what's the damage? It would be about $7 billion cut to state finances a year with the two questions. That's twice the damage of Trump's, big ugly bill, I like to call it, or they call it OB3 now. And that's on top of that too. So that means together they are a $10 billion cut to our state budget. Now, to put that in perspective, historically, the worst catastrophe of this kind in the past 40 years was the great financial crash of 2008, 2009. And this is four times the damage of that recession, the worst in our lifetimes. That was 2.5 billion a year in losses, and caused, mayhem as it was. This is four times that damage that we're facing right now. But here's the thing we've learned about this. I mean, and we had to ask ourselves already starting back in January and February, what if it's all a bluff? I mean, what if they're bluffing us? They're bluffing the state legislature, labor, community, progressives. It sounds crazy, but really what it is what we like to call, we've been calling for years, a Q bomb. A Q bomb is a joke off of The Mouse That Roared, a film of the 1960, around 1960, a satire from the time of the Cold War. The picture here, of course, is from Dr. Strangelove, which is almost from the same time and has a similar kind of atmosphere. Both of them starred Peter Sellers. And what is a Q bomb? A Q bomb for us, for in the movie, it's a doomsday device that blows the whole world up. But for us, we meant it like a hard to beat ballot question, like an income tax cut. In other words, a question bomb that is used to extort a deal by threat to the legislature. Now, we meant that in Raise Up Mass as something like, putting something on that we think is a good thing, but they think is not a good thing. Maybe put on something that's also we know is popular, but is a good thing, and then are willing to negotiate some kind of compromise. That was our idea of a Q bomb. These folks, these tech billionaires, have done something absolutely unprecedented in the history of the state ballot. They've put something on the ballot that they themselves know is a bad idea, that it will destroy the state. It will destroy them as businesses. And yet they put it on there to terrorize the legislature and the rest of us into making a deal. So what do they really want? If they don't want the income tax cut, what is it they do want? So in order to answer that, I just want to take a step backwards to remind us of our victory in 2022. In case you missed it, the Fair Share Amendment, which raised an amazing amount of money. In 3 years, our state has been able to spend $3.5 billion in new public education spending. I mean, that meant we could give universal school meals for free to every student. We can do tuition. We've done tuition-free community college for all community college students. We've increased local school aid. We've increased scholarship funding for all the state colleges and universities. We've expanded childcare funding, which is so needed. Another 2.4 billion went into new transportation spending, free and expanded regional transit, MBTA infrastructure improvements, which have, made a very palpable difference, a lot more to do, and road and bridge repairs. So in other words, a stronger economy for everybody. Now, that means that the Fair Share Amendment made our tax system more adequate, it provided the kind of money we really need. But the most important thing for us, for Raise Up Massachusetts, and I believe for the labor movement and for Progressive Mass and all of us, is that it made our system fairer. Our system was what you call a regressive system. In other words, the poor pay a higher percent of their income in taxes, state and local taxes, than the wealthy do. That means that just in the way we collect taxes, we actually make the poor poorer in relationship to the rich. In other words, we increase economic inequality. So this is looking at the big winners in the Massachusetts economy. This was the slide we used to use before we passed it. The big winners paid lower taxes. Pre-fair share amendment, the average tax rate for state and local taxes for the bottom 99%, pretty much across the board, was 99.4% of their income they paid in taxes. Well, the not terrible. It's okay, but if you're a low income person, or it's a lot of money, and if you're a middle class person, it's a chunk of change. But the average rate for the top 1%, people who made over $1 million a year, was only 6.5%. That's a quite a striking difference. And we estimated at the time, and accurately, as you can see from how we've been able to spend $6 billion, and more than $6 billion, almost six and a half, $7 billion, is we estimated $2.2 billion were lost a year just from the fact that the wealthy paid a lower percent like that. So that's what you call a regressive tax system. Now, if you look at it post Fair Share Amendment, it's a much more proportional tax system. It's not perfect. It's definitely not what we call progressive, where the wealthy pay a higher percent than other people, but it's more like a proportional system. Particularly people who make over $1 million a year are a little bit more now in the average. There's a little bump down for people who earn less than $1 million a year because they don't pay the surtax, but it's still not the same drop off to 6.5%. And so we have a much smoother tax system. It's proportional. It does not increase economic inequality just in the way it's collected. The problem is our opponents said that is the worst thing that has happened to this state. We need to reverse the fairness of the Fair Share Amendment. In other words, they don't mind the adequate revenue, but they do not like that they pay now the same proportion of taxes that everybody else pays. And so what do they want? First, they want every penny of the Fair Share Amendment, the millionaire's tax, back in their pockets. And they've been pretty explicit in several venues about what they mean by that. For example, they want to phase out the estate tax on inheritances for estates greater than $2 million. They just want to wipe that out. A very regressive change. They want to reduce unemployment benefits and shift the costs of unemployment insurance to the employees, to the workers. And they want to create what they call millionaire surtax workarounds. Now, these may all be unconstitutional, but it would be on us to sue them if they, were created. And that's a very arduous thing, and they're very subtle, weird things they've come up with. But they're all ways to cut taxes for exactly the people who pay the surtax. The second thing they want is to make themselves the oligarchs of the state, a la Elon Musk. In other words, dictating fiscal policy to the legislature and the governor under the threat of more question bombs and over the heads of community and labor and, the majority of people, in other words. So this is the Trump counter-revolution right in our own state, subverting our gains for working people that we won over the past 12 years. We cannot and we must not let them win. This is it took 115 years to win the Fair Share Amendment. They want to take back what that means, the fairness that brought to our system. Now, the good news is we can defeat these extortionists because they are vulnerable. You say, how could they be vulnerable? They're billionaires. They're these shadowy corporate leaders and so on. How can you get at them? Well, because they are billionaires, they actually run these major businesses and institutions. And that means they need good relations with political leaders. They need it with business leaders. They need it with the community in order to protect their bottom line, because we can threaten their bottom line if they are hurting our state. So we have then turned our focus to that. And we were very fortunate in February to get what I call the February informant, who exposed where we could do this, what I call the joint. I'll explain that in a minute. Who is the February informant? He is a CEO who pays himself $15 million a year. He is a high-ranking officer of all the consortiums that are backing, and even the ones who are not openly backing this thing, which will become clear to you in a minute. Why did he come to us? He asked actually just to meet with me as the chair of the Raise Up Ballot Committee, and so my name was there in order to try to get us to make a deal with them to help them get a deal from the legislature and the governor, who they were, running into a little trouble with on that. And so this for them, this was a kind of shuttle diplomacy. I don't know if he was doing it totally on his own or it was a mission. Uh, but it was a wonderful thing for us because in order to persuade us that we should make a deal, he exposed the workings of their whole coalition. And I will share that with you now. First, he said they're the true believers. True believers are those people who think that public schools are a bad thing. They don't want there to be taxes, really. They don't believe in taxes. They don't believe in public services. They believe everything should be run by private enterprise. The second group are the blackmailers, the people who are running an extortion racket with Q bombs here. And the third group, and this is really the most interesting thing he shared, are the secret blackmailers, the people who have never said they wanted this ballot question, have never endorsed this ballot question, but actually want the deal that the blackmailers want. And so the first two groups are the people who are explicitly backing these two questions. They created a shadow corporation called the Massachusetts Opportunity Alliance. They funnel all the money in a dark way, unreported way, to the ballot campaign, which they call Taxpayers for an Affordable Massachusetts. This was all set up in the Globe. We knew about this already 2 years ago by John Fish, the CEO of Suffolk Construction, a billionaire, who I will get back to a little later in this presentation because of what he has done since. Okay, so you have these groups. So the first question is, who are the true believers? I mean, what groups are those? Well, they are the Pioneer Institute, the Massachusetts Fiscal Alliance, and the National Federation of Independent Business. These are all highly ideological right-wing business organizations. More interesting, who are the blackmailers? Well, they're a group called the Massachusetts Competitiveness Partnership. And to give you an idea of who's in that, you have Fidelity, Suffolk Construction, you have Bank of America, you have the Mass General Brigham Hospital is in it. You have Bay State Health in it. This is a group of very high-powered CEOs of not just corporations, but also nonprofit institutions. And the secret blackmailers, then, he explained, are the five families. That's a kind of joking way we describe the traditional business lobbies in the state. To be specific, the Boston Chamber of Commerce, the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, the AIM, the Associated Industries of Massachusetts, NIOP, the big real estate developers consortium, and the Business Roundtable. Those are the five families. Kind of nice little mafia reference. And so the question is, who are the leaders of these three groups? They each have a leader, according to our informant. The leader of the True Believers is Chris Anderson. He is the head of the Mass High Tech Council, which you don't see on here yet. I will explain that in a minute. He's the CEO of that group, but he's also an infamous hardcore, Grover Norquist, Reagan type tax cutting guy. The head of the blackmailers is Jay Ash, who is the CEO of the Mass Competitiveness Partnership. And according to our informant, the head of the secret blackmailers is Jim Rooney of the Boston Chamber of Commerce. Now, where is the Mass High Tech Council in all this? They are here. Now, this is a Venn diagram, and it's funny. The informant said to me while I was thinking in my head, boy, this is like a Venn diagram. He suddenly said, it's like a Venn diagram. I was like thinking to myself, I've already drawn it in my mind. I will now draw it in a PowerPoint. The Mass High Tech Council is in this overlapping thing between the blackmailers and the true believers. And that's an interesting thing in itself because most of the members of the Mass High Tech Council, there were 64 back when this started, 64 institutions, mostly businesses, tech businesses, are not true believers. They're much closer in their mentality to the blackmailers and even the secret blackmailers, but they are led by Chris Anderson. So they are all like very explicitly involved in the campaign, whether they know it or not. They can be have a light shown on them that way. And in military strategy, when you're facing your enemy as a kind of front, the question you often ask yourself is, where is the joint? The joint is a very particular term, and it's a very important one. It means not the weak point in their front, because the weak point they can sacrifice, like the fiscal alliance, for example. It's not the strong point, like the heart of the blackmailers, because that's impregnable. You would just be banging your head against the wall. It's the place that is crucial to their front, but is weak because of that. It's like a joint. It's like a knee joint or a shoulder joint or a hip joint, something that can actually be easily damaged, even though it is so crucial to their whole thing. And that's why the Mass High Tech Council to us back in the winter became the joint, the thing that we were going to focus our attention on to shame these people. So we went to work on the joint by shaming the members of the High Tech Council to leave. And our first big success was with the universities and hospitals that were members. We got a whole bunch of them, including state universities, also private universities and hospitals, to leave the High Tech Council, and got this article in the Globe even saying Mass High Tech Council is losing higher ed members amid its income tax rollback push. Why? Well, because of our work, right? So we did it with a combination of two tactics. One was social media ads, digital ads.
The Massachusetts High Technology Council is pushing ballot measures that will strip billions from public education, research, and healthcare. But the leaders of several colleges and universities are lending their institutions' names to the organizations spearheading these devastating cuts. These leaders should be championing investments in education and research, not standing with a coalition intent on slashing them. It's time for them to lead, oppose the cuts, and protect Massachusetts' future.
The other tactic that we used was street protests. So here we are in front of the headquarters of a couple of these Mass High Tech Council members in the financial district in Boston with our mobile billboard there that we drove around all day, calling them out all through the financial district. They are calling them out for trying to destroy our state, the healthcare and education of our state. So between those two tactics, we've been able to get High Tech Council members to leave that consortium. 13 out of 64 members have quit because of the recklessness of their ballot question and our work. And it's been so devastating to them. That's 20% of their total membership, that they've actually even taken their whole web list of members off the web so that they can hide their losses. But we've created a website called Mass High Tech Council Revealed, or mhtcrevealed.com, which lists all the groups that have resigned from the Mass High Tech Council and still lists all the groups that are still part of the High Tech Council. And we've spread this kind of work to the members of the Massachusetts Competitive Partnership, because they're similar groups, like I said, the Mass General Hospital and so on. We were so successful with this that in the end of March, we actually started to feel like we were going to win this campaign. We were going to beat them off the ballot, and they wouldn't get a deal. And that's because in the press, we heard this. I mean, listening here to what the campaign's top mastermind and likely its top donor said about his own ballot initiative in Bloomberg News on March 27th. Well, first they reported, Tufts University's Center for State Policy Analysis put the state's potential revenue loss at $5.1 billion, or 8% of its budget. And here he is, such a significant hit would force painful cuts without providing a meaningful economic boost, said John Fish, Chief Executive Officer of Suffolk Construction, the state's largest general contractor. And then he says, to reduce it by that much, you're going to cut services and programs that are very important to the Commonwealth, said Fish. It's going to make matters worse. This from the top mastermind of the whole campaign, the top blackmailer. So what did it mean? This was 3 days before the ballot initiative committee of the legislature was going to hear the question. I think they were on the verge of capitulating. Problem is, since then, they've heard too many encouraging words, carelessly, I think, said by politicians who suggest that maybe we could talk to people. Maybe, very vague stuff. I don't think it means the firewall against negotiations came down, but it sounded enough that way that they've reconsolidated and kept on fighting. But they are in a weaker position. And you can see exactly how the position plays out when you look at something from a leader of the secret blackmailers and how they frame it now in the current time. This is from the Boston Globe. Mass Taxpayers Foundation, one of the 5 families, is the first major business group to oppose the income tax cut proposal. So it sounds like they're completely, when are they going to join Raise Up, right? This is Doug Howgate, their leader. But then it goes on deeper in the article to point this out, what they actually really want again. Howgate hopes the Mass Taxpayer Foundation's recommendations, and they were listed before, reducing the state's unemployment system, phasing out the estate tax, and capping overall state spending, kind of like 62F, can help prompt the income tax cut sponsors to drop their campaign. In other words, what he's really doing is saying, give them the deal that they did this whole thing to get. In other words, it's not really an opposition to them. It's an opposition to the Q bomb, which was always out there to distract us. So the fight over this deal is absolutely the focus right now. If in the next 6 weeks we can prevent a deal, one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to abandon their going to the ballot, and I'll tell you this, if they, many of them will abandon it, even if it goes to the ballot, or a rump group like the True Believers tries to carry it to the ballot, well, we'll fight it at the ballot. We have commitments from unions to fight the campaign like we have in the past. We know the messaging that works. Mass Inc. just did a poll that showed that people support this overwhelmingly, and then they reject it strongly once they hear just a couple arguments against it. So, it's a campaign we can win against a divided coalition. And thanks to our informant, we know that where the joint is, and that's where it will break, at the joint. So the question is, we have to save fair share. It's our greatest victory. It's a 115-year victory for fair taxes. It took us 10 years just to fight the single campaign of it. And so the question is, how can you join that fight? And there's really 2 things to do. One is about this deal, stopping the deal, calling, phone banking our state legislators, emailing them, telling them no deals with blackmailers. I think we're winning that fight. I think the legislative leadership understand what's at stake, but, they're under a lot of pressure to make this thing go away. We have to convince them that it won't go away if you make a deal. If you make a deal, they'll be back every cycle with the same kind of extortion. So we need to really shore that up. And that means the kind of work we're all good at, lobbying our legislators, advocating with them and telling them we've got their backs if they stand up to this. The second is to keep exposing the enemy, keep breaking that joint. And that means posting the videos we keep producing, the graphics we produce in your social media, and also joining our street protests. So I'll just conclude with our most recent social media video that's out there all around, and you can post yourself.
You've heard about the corporate tax cut ballot measure, the one that cuts $5 billion from Massachusetts schools and communities. Now the same wealthy CEOs are pushing a new scheme, A backroom deal with more tax breaks for corporations and millionaires. They say it's smaller, say it costs less, but it still cuts funding for schools and healthcare. So let's close the door to the backroom deals for millionaires and big corporations. Because a smaller bad idea is still a bad idea.
So there you have it.
Okay, Harris, time for Q&A?
Yeah.
Okay, let me add myself.
Let me say one thing.
Yes, go ahead.
Involved the way I suggest. Jonathan Cohn, who is right here, and also Grace McGovern, who is on the call, are our intrepid leaders of our grassroots campaign. So they will be able to help you get plugged into phone banks, to street protests, to whatever it is you want to do to help out.
Awesome, and we will talk about that more in a second. But before we do that, can I get a round of Zoom applause for Harris? I've already seen folks doing it, so just like to formally call that out. Love the way that Zoom visualized all of the clapping hands. Okay, so want to be able to go through some of the questions in the chat that have come up. I saw a question in the chat about what is the status, because Raise Up has also been supporting the corporate fair share bill. Saw a question about what is the status of that bill and what chance does it have of passing?
Well, I mean, it's a good question. I think one of the reasons they launched this campaign was also a counterattack on our new effort to get more fair taxation. So they were both focused on defeating, reversing fair share, but also making sure we didn't make any more gains on their profits and their domination, of the society. So corporate fair share was very scary to them because they're all tied in with these people like the multinationals and everything. They're the big fish. Not to rag on John Fish too much, but you get the idea. So we have put it in abeyance in some ways. I mean, we don't plan to give it up at all. I think we have to think about actually how to get back on the offensive once we sort of have absorbed this problem and the OB3 and talk about things we need to do on a much bigger scale even. I mean, if they're willing to go to a bigger scale, we have to go to a bigger scale. I mean, they represent 1% of the population. We represent 99% of the population. We have a right to think big, and we're looking out for the majority.
Great. And I see a question about whether there's a list of state reps and senators who we believe are like stand every which way about this, so those who need particular constituent contact.
Yes. Well, and Grace and Jonathan have a good list, and we keep updating it as we meet with people. I mean, I had a surprisingly good meeting today with Chairman Haggerty of the Housing Committee, who's not considered a progressive, but he totally got this. And he was sort of a guy we would have targeted. Instead, I was just impressed with how 100% he was on this. So that's the kind of thing, as we go along, and of course, as we call people, they get stronger, and we can move on to the people who are still weak.
And I think one thing that I would stress on that point is that the most valuable person for anybody to contact is going to be their own rep and senator. And that I always like to say that like everybody in the building can do a step more than they're already doing on pretty much any campaign that you're working on, whether the step is to get somebody who's opposing you to just shut up, or is it to get somebody who's already a champion to be bothering more of their colleagues. It's always helpful for them to hear, so because it increases the degree of fire that they bring to what they're working on. So I'm gonna go up. I saw another question about what is the status of these two questions with them being on the ballot?
Well, they both have to get their second round of signatures. Now, I have a spy in the signature gathering organization who explained to me that they are gathering those signatures. So, they were under contract to finish it. And like we would too. I mean, you don't give up on something until you can't get any kind of compromise anymore. So, I mean, if the goal is to extort a compromise from the legislature, they're going to push it till the deadline. So the question will be at the end of June, a couple of things could happen. One is we have a lawsuit against them with the SJC. And it went very well when we had oral arguments there. The judges were very hard on them for having a summary that misrepresented their question and misrepresented it in exactly the way that matters here by making it sound like it had less impact on rich people than it actually does, that benefited rich people less than it does. And so I don't know, that made me feel hopeful about it, but you can't rely on that. And that's only on the income tax question. So a lot of possible scenarios here. I don't think they ever wanted to go to the ballot with this after all that we've been through and found out from them. I mean, the way even Fish capitulated back in March shows that they're very wary of this. And I don't think, the only way it could possibly happen is if they allowed the rump group of true believers to go to the ballot. Now, when I talked to the informant, I said, well, why don't you just tell the true believers to stand down? And he was like, oh, we can't do that. They'll go to the ballot. And I'm like, and if we make a deal with you, they'll stand down. Like it didn't make any sense. It was clearly like a kind of, lame attempt at blackmail. But in all our experience, I mean, people can't go to the ballot without their financial backers usually. I mean, they'll just pull the plug on them. So unless there's something I don't understand here, it's hard to yes, I mean, it's another fascist distraction. It is in many ways. It is they're trying to put us back on our heels. So the one thing is the 62F one, the rebate one, the spending cap. We don't know. Maybe they'll try to go forward with that anyway. I mean, as you saw, Howgate said, capping spending was still a demand of the deal. They don't like the way 62F does it because it's too unpredictable, but they use it as a threat. Maybe they'll continue to threaten. That's why we are also asking the state legislature to repeal it, because there's no reason. That law is a terrible law anyway. And if it's repealed, then there's nothing to reform. There's nothing to weaponize. So that's a sort of secondary part of our calling and lobbying up there. But that's less the crux of the thing. The crux that we have to get this income tax thing defeated, because that is, devastating. And that's the thing people might vote for. They're not going to vote for 62F particularly if we get out there and say it's a dumb idea, because they don't know what it is. But if you say to people they want an income tax cut, they do know what that is. And so we'd have to spend a lot of our money and a lot of our field work and our shoe leather to convince people, like we did with Millionaires tax, to not go along with that. But you know how hard that is too. I mean, that's hard work.
Yeah, the one thing I'll just quickly tag in there and then go to one of the other questions in the chat, that something that was encouraging is polling that just came out from Mass Inc. that showed that when you actually explain to people the impacts of the income tax cut question, they start moving away from it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've been able to win these campaigns before,
Mhm.
I mean, of course, when the Libertarian Party said they wanted to cut the income tax and wreck the state, the difference between them and these people is they really were true believers. In other words, they were sincere. They
Mhm.
do believe that public schools are a bad idea.
Mhm.
But we did defeat them too. They went all the way to the ballot and we defeated them 70-30 in the end for an
Mhm.
income tax cut, So I know we can do it. It's just it is hard, and the times are worse than they were even back in 2008. That was
Mhm.
a time when people were maybe feeling a little more, generous spirited.
That I'll note one thing and then I'll go to another question, as well as to the one comment in the chat about a question about, is this another fascist distraction? I tend to view that any ballot question in Massachusetts this year that is trying to make us prevent regression is something that is an actively it is actively damaging a kind of right-wing effort if it's trying to make all of us expend more energy in Massachusetts to just stay where we are,
Yeah.
as opposed to any effort to make people's lives affirmatively better in the state, which is always worth the effort. Anything just to simply stay where we are is,
Or help with the midterm elections in other states.
yeah,
I mean, it's a big distraction from other fights we would be fighting now, like corporate fair share.
yeah. And I saw in the chat somebody asking about whether we know if any of the backers of this are in the Epstein files.
Mm.
Somebody made a song about the Epstein files that my kid shared with me. Yeah, it's so complicated. It sounded like you couldn't make up stuff like that. But who knows? I mean, these elites, though. I mean, look, one thing I'm not a big fan of Shakespearean conspiracy theories, not because they aren't real, but
Mm.
because they're a little too ad hominem or something. What I like is to focus on the real conspiracy here, which is,
Mhm.
the rate of return must be higher than the rate of growth if these people want to, keep becoming richer than the rest of us. And that's
Mhm.
the conspiracy
That's
they all agree on.
yes.
Mhm. And then I will say, like I said, see one question in the chat as a part of follow up to this meeting. What exactly do we need to do to win the campaign? What would you say if you people leave this meeting? What are three things that you would say that they should do after this, and that we can make sure to send in follow up, or even in the
Well, I
chat?
think they need to contact their legislators, and they, like you said, their own legislators they should call anyway, even if they're good or hopeless on the issue,
Mhm.
because they're your legislators, and they have to hear from you. But you should join the phone banks where we're generating calls to the people who are on the fence and we need to move
Mhm.
over, people who are close but not there yet, so that we create that firewall in the state house. So that is, classic, grassroots advocacy that we all do so much of the time. It's very important that we do that in the next couple of weeks, next like 6 weeks max, right? I mean, it's
Mhm.
over in 6 weeks, meaning that stage is over, and hopefully the whole campaign is over, but not because they got a deal. That would be the worst outcome.
Mhm.
The best outcome is that they give up, as they should. That they find out they can't get the deal and they don't want the ballot question either. So that's a very important thing to work on. The other thing is this public campaign of education, like that last video I showed, gets across a lot of our message in a very simple way. First of all, the damage this would do, cutting healthcare and education. People need to see that and know
Mhm.
that, because we saw in the Mass Inc. poll that gets people off of this. And the other thing that gets them off of it is hearing, and this was in the poll too, is hearing that this only benefits millionaires and billionaires, that's for the big corporations and so on. So
Mhm.
things like that are very important to get out there. The street protests are also a way to do that. So if you can get out to the protest, given where it is, that most of them are in Boston, but we've, done them out in Western Mass and New Bedford, all around. And if you can't, then to do more posting of the social media stuff so that you educate people in your circle or in your memberships or whatever to resist this.
Mhm.
Don't fall for it. They're duping you. It's a
Mhm.
really terrible thing. So I think those are the two basic things for people to do. Um, I mean, we have spent money. I mean, we spent uh, $500,000 of union dues payers' money on this campaign already. We have committed to spend at least 3.5 million more if we have to go to the ballot. And we need all of your shoe leather to make that work, because I'll tell you, a fair share would not have been won with our ads if we hadn't done the field work. I can say that as having served under Enid Eckstein and Jonathan Cohn in the field work, and Christina Bellin and others. That was essential. I felt the grist was in the mill there. I was convincing voters to vote with us because they'd seen ads from the other side that had convinced them to vote against the millionaire's tax. And, a conversation at the door was all it took to pull them back to us. So that combination is our secret weapon. We have, the rank and file dues members of all our unions and the rank and file activists of all our organizations it's a mighty weapon.
See a hand raised from Rep. Mary Keefe, so I'll tag you in.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Harris. I just wanted to say this is such a great tool, and I'm glad we're taping this meeting tonight. I'm glad for the story of talking to Chair Haggerty, because that just goes to show you the conversation is so critical, and I want to work with our progressive caucus to bring this forward and share like what I'm doing. So I get a lot of emails from constituents that are saying, I support this. So I crafted, thank you, Harris, for helping me. You know, um, a nice, not in the weeds email, but then pointing to this training. Please come to this tonight. Please learn more about it. Just not a threatening thing, but a good invitation to say, let's think together and be smart. I can't support this. I hope you're with me. And I think we can do that. I see Trisha Farley Bouvier is on the call tonight too. And it's a critical time for us because we're getting into budget weeks. And so it's so hard. The next 6 weeks is leading up to July 1st. Amazing. We might have the budget done on time this year. So, but anyway, I just wanted to say thank you and know that we're trying to work with this and educate people, educate ourselves, and really feel like we're standing together as Raise Up Massachusetts always does. So thank you, and Progressive Mass too.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. Well, it's interesting. I mean, when you say that about representatives, I mean, I was impressed when the informant, met with me, that they seemed to assume that we in the legislature were in cahoots with each other, which isn't always the way we feel. But I took that as a very good sign. It meant that, on this issue, we were, Team Massachusetts, and that we could make this work. The fact that he wanted me and Raise Up to try to broker a deal for them, I was like, well, that's a sign of weakness. I mean, because, first of all, why would we do that? And second, it means they are having trouble getting a hearing in the legislature. So I know it's a delicate thing, and I have had some sleepless nights over it, believe me. But I think we can hold the line here if we give the legislature and the governor a sense that we're really in this for real.
No, yeah, well said. And I'll say thank you to Rep Keefe and thank you to Rep Farley Bouvier who are here because it's important that let's say legislators speak clearly, as you're doing, Stan, about why this is bad for the Commonwealth, and to make sure that let's say constituents and fellow legislators know that clearly as well. I see. Let's see. I think I saw one. Do I see any other questions in the chat? I think we can take. I will allow. Grace and Cressida, would you like to make any pitches for people to do things?
Thank you. I would love, I've plugged it in the chat a couple times. I will send the link again, but I would love for folks to join the phone bank. We have one a week from today from 5 to 7. And I will send the link again.
God, then you caught me mid-bite on my deck. Thank you, everybody. Just shout out to Harris for a second because I want to copy everything of that presentation and then some if possible. But I saw a lot of comments in the chat about like, how can I share the ads? How can I share the ads? Please do. I put in the chat a YouTube link version of it that you can feel free to share around. But the ads should also be posted across all Raise Up pages. So if you want to make it easier on yourself and just reshare what is on the Raise Up pages, you're welcome to do so. Like Harris said, educating people about this is going to be really critical. So that would be really helpful if you can.
Awesome. And I will shout out kind of Grace's pitch for the phone banks. The phone banks haven't, I will say that the phone banks, you're calling wonderful people because we've been calling people on the Progressive Mass list. So they're guaranteed to be nicer calls than any swing state phone banking that you've had to do over the years. The more people on any call, the more people we're able to reach by doing so. So I'll amplify that in the chat. Any final questions from folks? What I would say, and then Harris, do you think I should give people a few minutes to call or email their representatives and senators before we close?
That's your call, but you're good at doing that.
Okay. Okay, before we move to doing that, Harris, let's say final words from you for the evening.
Yeah, I think the final word just it is so interesting the way this thing is unfolded. It's almost like we could make a Netflix show out of it or something. I don't know. I mean, it's such a cloak and dagger thing that these clowns have put on for us. But yeah, it really comes down to that is do not negotiate with these people because you're encouraging them to threaten our state. I mean, anybody who says they will blow up the state's finances in order to get a tax break for the richest people in the state is, not not it shouldn't be dealt with that in a civilized way. I mean, you just say no, no, thank you, goodbye, and we need to get that across. So legislators need to let the leadership know too. I don't want negotiation with these people. I don't want to deal with these people. And I will support you in that if you keep them out of the building, keep them away from the gates.
Mhm. Awesome. I will say, before we formally close, first of all, another round of Zoom applause for Harris. Uh, before we close, I always like doing hand raise exercises with people. So raise your hand if you're planning to call or email your state legislators later tonight, and early tomorrow is fine if you're not a night person, about this. And I'll drop in again the link that has a sample script that you can use. And then raise your hand if you think I'll talk to friends about this, whether that's directly or whether that's you posting on social media, whether that's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, or wherever you post incessantly and perhaps more than one should. Uh, Great. And raise your hand if you're willing to, if we end up having to, we want that to not have to fight this in November. We want this done, like, not even on the ballot at all, but then raise your hand if you're ready to help make sure that these questions don't pass, whether it's by blocking them from the ballot or making sure that they die in flames in November. Love to see all the thumbs up and the hands. Um, with that, I'll leave this open for the final, let's say, 2 minutes for people if you want to kind of write to have block off time because this was going to end at 8 and you have dedicated 2 minutes to write to your legislators or call them before then you go back to the rest of your evening. So I'll leave it open for those 2 minutes. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again soon and working with you in the fight in the days and months and years to come.